The wind swept down from the high peaks that night like a creature with intent. It cut across the open, Wyoming basin where Luke Barrett's ranch stood isolated against an endless stretch of white. Luke had spent his life learning to read the land the way others read faces. Long before the snowfall thickened into a suffocating curtain, he sensed something was wrong. The cattle shifted uneasily, the horses snorted and stamped, and the sky had taken on a dark, swollen hue that carried warning in its very color. Luke lived alone by design, or at least that was the story he told himself. Years of loss had shaped him into a man of habit and restraint, someone who trusted labor more than people and silence more than promises. The ranch was his refuge, built piece by piece after the war had stripped him of everything else. As evening fell and the cold sharpened its teeth, Luke pulled his coat tighter and rode the fence line one final time, ice clinging to his beard and lashes. That was when he noticed movement where there should have been none. At first he dismissed it as the storm playing tricks on his eyes, shadows bending under the weight of wind. But then the shapes shifted again, unmistakably human. Two figures staggered through the deep drifts, barely standing, swallowed and revealed by the blowing snow. Luke's pulse quickened. Nothing alive should have been out there in weather like that. He swung onto his horse and rode hard toward them, the storm muffling sound and distance alike. As he drew closer, the truth became clear. Two young women, hair braided but frozen stiff, clothing thin and torn, faces pale with exhaustion. They moved not with strength but with stubborn will. When one fell to her knees, the other tried desperately to lift her, hands trembling, balance failing. Luke dismounted and reached them just as the standing woman swayed, her eyes dull, lips blue with cold. He spoke calmly, though the wind tore the words from his mouth. When neither answered, he did not hesitate. He wrapped them both in his heavy coat, lifting them with the strength earned through years of unforgiving work, and secured them to his horse. The ride back felt endless, the storm clawing at him from every direction, but Luke did not slow. His focus narrowed to a single purpose: keep them alive. Inside the cabin, warmth fought back. Flames leapt in the hearth as Luke laid the women near the fire, rubbing frozen hands, wrapping them in blankets, murmuring steady reassurances meant as much for himself as for them. Slowly, painfully, color returned to their cheeks. Their breathing steadied, though they did not wake. Luke stayed awake through the night, feeding the fire, listening to the wind batter the walls, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest, something he had buried long ago. By morning, the storm had passed. The world lay silent beneath heavy snow. One of the women awoke first, dark eyes snapping open, fear flashing as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Her body tensed despite her weakness. Luke raised his hands slowly, his voice low and careful, explaining she was safe, that he had found them in the storm. She watched him closely. When her sister stirred, she reached for her without thinking, relief softening her expression. They spoke quietly in their own language, voices filled with emotion Luke did not need to understand. Their names were Tala and Mira. In halting words, they told him they were Apache sisters, separated from their people after trusting men who had offered help and left them with nothing. Luke felt anger coiled tight in his chest, but he offered food and rest instead of questions. Days passed as the sisters recovered. The cabin, once hollow with solitude, filled with movement and quiet purpose. Tala carried herself with steady confidence, her presence calm and grounding. Mira was gentler, her rare smiles warm enough to soften the coldest moments. They helped where they could, learning the rhythms of ranch life, mending, cooking, bringing life back into a space Luke had only ever survived in. At night, stories were shared by firelight. The sisters spoke of their people, their beliefs, the road that had led them to loss. Luke listened and eventually spoke of his own, of a wife gone too soon, of a child who never had the chance to grow. He had built his world around that silence, believing it was safer than hope. When the snow finally receded and the roads reopened, Luke prepared to take them to town. He told himself it was the right thing. Tala listened without expression. Mira's eyes shone with sadness. Then Tala spoke. Among their people, she said, survival and unity mattered more than convention. They had prayed during the storm, believing death was certain. When Luke appeared, they saw purpose, not chance. Mira added softly that they wished to stay, not as dependents, but as partners willing to build a life with the man who saved them without expectation. Fear and longing collided inside Luke. He argued, spoke of judgment, of hardship, of the world's refusal to understand. Tala met his resistance with quiet certainty. Mira spoke gently of the loneliness she saw beneath his strength. That night, Luke walked the land alone, listening to the silence he had once mistaken for peace. By dawn, the answer was clear. The seasons turned, whispers followed, but the land remained steady. Together, they built a life rooted in trust and respect, forged not by ease, but by choice. And Luke learned that some storms do not destroy. They reveal what was waiting to be claimed all along.